Okay, hello. I think we are all online. And I see the countries going on in the live icon on the left bottom side of the screen, so everything looks in order. We will start in a minute. I'm just waiting for people to join as we see the number of people increasing very rapidly. Okay, Barbara, you say you cannot share the screen. I think it will be possible after I stop sharing, yes. So, all right, let's start slowly, also not to steal too much time from Barbara. This session is about FAIR technology adoption in demonstrators, mostly, so also in industrial adoption. And it will be recorded as every other session, and your slides will be also available with the recordings after the event, in the event page. Please ask your questions using the QA functionality on the right-hand side. And you can also raise your hand, of course, with if you want to ask a question audibly, and you will be invited to the stage. And I think for technical reasons, it's important that you use the QA functionality for the questions and not the chat. But of course, if it's in the chat, we also try to ask it to the speakers. We have, on the Ontology Commons, we have many demonstrators. These are industrially relevant, validated use cases that will demonstrate the expected impact of Ontology Commons project, particularly on standardization, findability, accessibility, interpretability, and reusability of the data. And that's why we also focus on FAIR today in this session. Our objectives today is basically to provide an introduction to FAIR principles very briefly, and initiatives and practical aspects. And our first talk, I think, will address to this shortly. Then we will demonstrate the FAIR implementation in the industry via Ontology Commons demonstrators, and also hope to gain insights about best practices and challenges of FAIR adoption in industrial use cases. Our speakers today, first Barbara Magagna from GOFAIR Foundation, then we have Sebastian Scholze and Correia from ATB Bremen, and Philippe Rocca-Sera, finally, from Oxford E-Research Center. And we are looking forward to hear their talks. And I will give the stage now to Barbara. I think she can share her screen right now. Thank you very
much. I hope you will see my screen in a few seconds. Do you see it?
Yes, I think so.
Yes. So thank you for introducing me. I will present the FAIR principles and how GOFAIR is helping to implement those. Yeah, I'm not from GOFAIR, but I am collaborating with Eric Scholze, who is from GOFAIR. So I am from the Environment Agency Austria, and I had the pleasure to work together with Eric Scholze the last 2 years on the products that I'm also going to present today, and the approaches. So Eric unfortunately cannot participate because he is occupied with other commitments in these days. So I will do my best to replace him today. So as you all know, the FAIR guiding principles started to become officially very important after the publication of the FAIR Guiding Principles paper from 2016. It raised really high attention and also adoption by many institutions and also the EU's everybody is talking about FAIR principles. It's not sure if everybody really knows what it is about, but for sure it's about data and services that are findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable for both machines and for people. So it should also be machine readable and not only human readable. So what is needed to make data fair? I will go through the different principles, but immediately you will see that metadata pops up very often. So FAIR is 90% metadata. And it's also about human agreements on the domain relevant community standards and procedures. And yes, we addressed this 90% in the last 2 years. So we are looking at fair metadata because we think if you achieve fair metadata, you have already achieved a lot. The next steps is to look at the data themselves. But I will focus on fair metadata at the moment. So the GOFAIR has developed an approach called FAIR implementation profiles to implement the FAIR principles. And as you can see here, these are a collection of machine-readable human agreements addressing each of the 15 FAIR principles. So we look into the choices and challenges that communities take to implement each of the FAIR principles and collect these implementation choices and then evaluate their fairness. Choices and challenges, the difference is that communities can choose to just reuse existing implementation solutions, or they can try to implement their own or develop their own implementation solutions. We must say that it would be better, to just find common agreements, also look for convergence of existing solutions, because there are already many implementations that are not consistent or that are not working together. Therefore, we try also in our workshops to help to converge towards common solutions. So the foundation of the FAIR implementation profile is a FIP ontology, where you can see that a FAIR implementation community, which is any self-identified organization composed of more than one person sharing a common interest to aspire the creation of fair data and services. So a FAIR implementation community declares to use FAIR enabling resources, which are any digital object that provide function needed to achieve some aspect of fairness, and which is linked directly to one or more FAIR principles. And these FAIR enabling resources might be available FAIR enabling resources so that you just can take them, or FAIR enabling resources that are in development. So a FAIR implementation community can declare to use something that is already existing, or declares to plan to use something that is existing or is still in development. And these resources can be used for data-related or metadata-related questions addressing each of the FAIR principles. So here you see an overview of the FAIR enabling resource types. So for each of the principles, we have identified resources that address the topic that is covered by that principle. And then I will go through each of them now. You can see that the principle at the bottom, the community-specific metadata, is addressed here with the FAIR implementation profile as a whole, because this is a list of community-specific choices. And we propose to have the FIP resource, which is a machine-readable resource, as input for the principle R1.3. So the first FAIR enabling resource that applies for F1, which says metadata are assigned a globally unique and persistent identifier, and where we distinguished two questions. This question, the same question for metadata and for data sets separately. And for both, the answer is we need a global, unique, persistent, and resolvable identifier. And there are many options for that at the moment available. So you can have digital object identifiers, you can have Perls or EPIC or handle systems. All these are global, unique, and persistent identifiers. So this is what can be used. URL, which is not persistent, would not be a FAIR enabling an appropriate FAIR enabling resource to be used. F2 is data are described with rich metadata. And so it means that you would need metadata schemas to increase the findability of your data and metadata. And these are not community specific, but are global recognized metadata standards like the ISO 19115 for geographic information, or the serif, or DCAT, or whatever is used in your broader domain for your metadata. So this is just a metadata targeted question. And F3 is metadata clearly and explicitly include the identifier of the data it describes. So it is the mechanisms that links metadata to data, and which really helps to the machine to recognize where the metadata is linked to. So we have only a few approaches that really work at this stage. So that we have the FAIR data point that we developed, but there are the FAIR digital objects that are in discussions, and also in the FAIR digital object forum. And DOIs might also help, but are not the solution for the really recognizing stable connections between data and metadata. Then we go further with F4, metadata are registered or indexed in a searchable resource. So the question we pose is, in which search engines are your metadata records indexed? And this should be large Google, for example, Google search engine, or retrieve.data.org, where you can retrieve your metadata and data. A11, so A1 and subpoints of A11 address the accessibility aspects of FAIR data. And so the question is about metadata are retrievable by their identity. It should be open, free, and universal implementable. And A12 is addressing
apologies, Barbara, I think your slide disappeared, at least from me.
Disappeared? Okay.
Yes.
Strange.
And I'd like to also remind the time because we have.
Okay, I will go a bit. I will go a bit. Do you see it now?
Yes, again.
So you see here that we address these different possibilities, and you can go through each of these FAIR principles. Okay, and we do is we ask for these questions in a FIP wizard, and our new version will also include all the FAIR enabling resources as drop-down lists, which will be also evaluated via FAIR assessment tools, how fair they are. So the communities can just answer this in a guided questionnaire and get all the information collected as a human readable information or also as JSON LD. So we can sparkle over the results and make this accessible and reusable for analyzing the different FAIR enabling resources. We have collected last year more than 200 resources, and we put them together in a FAIR convergence matrix so that you can compare the different profiles between the communities. And I'm finishing. You can then analyze how
okay, this disappeared again. I don't know why this is happening, but
yeah. So I'm finishing. Okay, how this is comparable between communities. Do you see it now? Yes, and across within one domain or across domains. And we are hoping to include this evaluation step also already before people can choose it, so that early next year we can contribute with a tool that really is not just a list of choices for implementation, but also of fair implementations. So thank you very much. Sorry that there was some interruption. I don't know. I didn't change anything.
Yes, I also didn't understand why this was happening, but maybe some technical issue. Sometimes we are unlucky.
So
yes.
Just a last sentence. So if with this contribution, we hope that we can be an information layer within the FAIR digital object, because then you have a complete answer to how data are addressing the different principles.
Yeah. Thank you very much. If there are any questions from the audience, maybe one question, because we are already a little bit over the time, but I think that's very relevant and very useful presentation regarding also having a concrete tool for evaluating the fairness at the end. And if there is a question, we can have one question. Okay. Okay, Emna is asking, maybe if we can present it on the screen. Yeah, can we reuse the FIP ontology as a middle level, or I think it means middle level, or domain level?
It's not a domain level model, so it is just a generic model, yeah, ontology that can be reused in any domain. Yeah.
Okay.
You can use it for your domain. Okay.
Okay, I hope this answers the question. And if not, if Emna, you have follow-ups, please then use the chat. And I invite also Barbara to the discussion there to answer further questions. And also in our discussion session later, I'm sure, I have a lot of questions regarding the tool, but I like to keep them in the discussion session at the end of this discussion slot at the end of this session. Thank you very much to Barbara Magagna from Environmental Agency of Austria, who is also collaborating with GOFAIR. And now we have our second speaker, without any further ado, Sebastian Scholze and Correia from ATB Bremen. And they are both here. welcome, and I leave the stage to you.
Okay, welcome everyone. Yeah, Umut already introduced ourselves, so I think we can save a bit the time. We will present you one of the industrial demonstrators from Ontology Commons, and we will show you something about fairness at OAS. I will start a little bit in the beginning about OAS and the details of the demonstrator, and my colleague Anna, she will then, in the second part of the presentation, go explain the fairness in the OAS demonstrator. Maybe shortly in the beginning, OAS, that's a SME. It's a company specialized in weighing systems, plant construction, process control technologies, and yard management. And the nice thing is they have their own process control system, which in fact is a SCADA system and a machine execution system. And related to this, they also have the yard management system. But in the last years, they realized that their current solution of the yard management system is not flexible enough for new requirements of their customers, and therefore they decided to create a next generation yard management solution. That's also where we come into play, because in close collaboration with OAS, we from ATB developed this yard management solution. So the yard management in Ontology Commons in the demonstrator, the idea is to improve, in principle, the logistics control systems or the decision making in these logistic control systems. And this will be based on the data streams, which are semantically described by PSS ontologies. And as a starting point, what we did, we analyzed these definitions of a yard management, and then maybe short in the beginning, what is a yard management? So in a factory, it needs raw materials to produce something, and in the end, the finished products, they need to be brought to the customers. And that's in principle what you are steering and guiding with a yard management solution. So, for example, you can see on top left some trucks and a truck scale. So, a truck bringing raw materials, and it passes a sensor which sets the scale to 0. Then, if this happened, a barrier is opened, the truck goes onto the truck scale. Then the weighing is performed, and when it's done, a second barrier opens up and the truck can pass. And that's just an example, and you can see on this yard several such examples, and each yard is specific for the customer. And that's something what we define in a site definition file. And Anna, if you go to the next slide, maybe. Here you can see an example of such a yard definition. So in the picture on the left side, you see a parking place. On top, there's a check-in. Then you have two different barriers or entrances where you can enter the yard. And then you have, on this example, it's around 40 places where a truck can go to deliver goods or to receive goods to be delivered somewhere else. And what we did with this new yard management solution, we defined, you can see a little bit this XML structure on the left in the background, so that we are able to define such a yard with an XML structure. So that customization is much more easier to do. And also you can define some rules. So for example, if this loading station 1 is already occupied, then automatically a truck is routed to a different loading station. That's what we are doing in this yard management solution. And as I said, in Ontology Commons, we try to improve these decision makings. So for example, where a truck has to go by using ontologies. And then for these, I think starting from the next slide on, Anna will explain you something about the FAIR principles.
Yes, thank you, Sebastian. So we analyzed these files that we are using for the yard management system. So this site XML was one of them, and based on this, we found out that actually this two first principles, findability and accessibility, are already in a pretty good state within OAS. So the metadata and the data are fully identified by a persistence identifier. It allows for discovery. We can access the information contained in these files both manually and via machine, so via software. All this data is, both the metadata and the data are accessed through standardized protocols. But when it comes to interoperability and reusability, this is not so much implemented up to now. So there are some things that are implemented. So we have expressed our knowledge representation in standardized format, as you saw from Sebastian's presentation, this XML, which is not exactly an ontology as per ontology definition, but it is a standardized language that we developed together with OAS to use within the yard management software. So what is being implemented is, for instance, including references to other data that is also used within this software. And in reusability terms, in the principles, this is really just being now approached and in the planning phase. And this is what we hope is going to be introduced and it's going to be improved within Ontology Commons because of this starting of using an ontology for everything. And so I think it can be very well explained, this level of fairness within OAS, because we are using the data in this software development and in their products. So it needs to have already some of these principles implemented. But on the other hand, there is room for improvement because so this yard definition is only used internally. Only within OAS and when they want to set up new yard configurations for other clients, and so they never had to interact with other actors. So their small view of the world, let's say, of just using the data within their software was contained within OAS, and it grew over time, and now when they are thinking of putting themselves already a little bit more in connection with the clients that for the next yard configurations, then they need to go a little bit more in the direction of opening up this site definitions. And so the challenge is really how to bring more interoperability and reusability to the data outside of the OAS ecosystem. And so the opportunities that we saw here together with the OAS demonstrator, so is to use the methodologies and the Ontology Commons tools to build ontologies around this data that is used in their software, and so that and to build the ontologies that are forming the basis for this yard management ecosystem, and using the ontologies to facilitate both the interoperability and the reusability by going to use community standards, ontologies, and so on. So this is what we are discussing now with OAS and trying to implement this in the software, which facilitates that we from ATB are in close collaboration with them by developing the software. So, and that's it from our side.
Thank you very much to Anna and Sebastian from ATB Bremen in cooperation with OAS. Any questions from the audience? We have again maybe one question. Time for one question. Currently, I do not see anything. So I myself ask a question. I had, since I noted in the beginning of the presentation even, so you implemented 2 dimensions quite well, you said, findability and accessibility, and targeting now the other 2. And if someone asks you who wants to implement FAIR principles in their company, what's one benefit that you actually gained? So what changed in your life after making your data more findable and accessible? What would you say?
Yeah, go ahead, Anna.
Okay, first of all, I think I'm going to take something that Barbara said. Not everybody knows about FAIR principles. So if people are actually implementing these, it's because they actually see an advantage in introducing some interoperability, reusability, and findability. So by developing software, having things, data that is in one project, being able to reuse it in other projects, being able to connect with other types of data that is maybe needed for that software. So I think this comes naturally. That the fairness levels will go up. Okay,
so this is more because many people think, it's, at least from my experience with talking with industry demonstrators, that we don't do FAIR because our data is not open, so we are not involved with other people, etc. But you say that it's also important to do this, for example, increasing findability, accessibility within an organization.
Exactly.
Between data, so not only about data being open, etc. Okay, good. Thank you very much. And now we can very rapidly go to our next presenter. And I'd like to thank again Anna and Sebastian. And now we have, if I find the agenda again, yes, Philippe Rocca-Sera from Oxford E-Research Center, and he will present us about FAIR cookbook. Philippe?
Hello, yes. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Umut, and for the invitation and the opportunity to present the work, and also extending the thanks to Yann Lefranc, who actually reached out and to allow us to present the FAIR cookbook. So very rapidly, I will be presenting an effort that is the product of the IMI FAIR Plus project. This is a cracking team that has been assembled by the consortium to provide guidance about how to do FAIR in the context of, a kind of private-public partnership where pharma industry meets academic labs, essentially, around the theme of FAIR. So if I go to the next slide, yes, there's a bit of a flag. Basically, you've got the link to the FAIR cookbook, which I will put in the chat anyway for everyone to consume. This is the resource that we are currently developing, and if you want to peruse it and have a browse, this short talk would be a brief review of what we have developed so far. And so in a way, what we wanted to develop with that content is something that is really fair for doer. People who are faced with a verification process and they would like to start, and they need to find guidance that is really meaningful to them, hands-on, practical, but also to give a bit of landscape about why doing FAIR, possibly in the context of life sciences and pharma, obviously, because we are funded by an IMI project, and what it means to deliver that. And I think going back to the previous question, like really also to break some kind of a myth about FAIR, meaning absolutely open data. No, FAIR means just you have metadata that describes how to access the data, for instance. These are the kind of things that you can do by providing proper annotation and using vocabulary that exist that are developed by a number of resources. So we are targeting, anyone who is interested or who is a kind of application involvement in doing the verification process. And it is being developed by people who are doing FAIR research themselves, but also data manager and professionals in industry that are confronting with that shift of pivoting a number of data stores into, linked data and knowledge graphs, for instance. And there is a kind of relation between the two things, and I will touch about that at the end. So moving on, the motivations were really, again, that, providing a very practical, hands-on examples on how you can do that with either specific data types that you are working on, let's say, gene expression data, for instance, but also we also look not only at the data, but also at the services that you may want to verify. So how do you go about verifying an API, for instance, and these kind of things. The main point is also to identify the kind of capabilities and capacity that you need to build around these topics as well to deliver FAIR. So we obviously need to understand the kind of, to learn from the data set that we have exposed to. And this is a kind of continuous interaction with a number of IMI projects because FAIR Plus was funded specifically to develop practices around verification by interacting with sister projects funded by the IMI. So that was a really important aspect of the interaction. And also we had to understand how far we are in the verification process. So what are the indications of both the level of fairness, but also the capability that the tools that you are using, whether these tools are mature or not, and to understand these aspects. Most of the work that we do, because we work with academia mostly, with EFPA use cases, we try to give examples using open source tools as well. So just to lower the barrier of entry so that people can really test for themselves. And what was important as well is to identify the skills and challenges in that journey. So FAIR is vast. There is a number of skills that are required. And sometimes you also run into difficulties, and you need to be aware of that. So quickly, the audience that we have in mind is very, very wide. We target, obviously, technologies and people that are hands-on at the coalface of the verification process, but also we had to interact with the funding agencies, the data managers, managed levels, and researchers to convince them that there is a value in delivering FAIR. And this is, again, the crux of the question. If you invest time and effort, what do you get back? And because it's still quite early days, I think we already see first the industry pivoting to that concept, a very strong uptake in the fact that basically the mobilization of the data is enacted and is much easier to somehow connect and find entities that are relevant for your data mining. So let's go straight into the landing page. This is what you receive, what you see when you reach the page. Technically, it's built on a Jupyter book, which allows you to use Markdown to describe the content of the recipe and provide Jupyter notebooks as well for all the code, executable code that we may see. So on the left-hand side, you've got overall the main content, the table of content of the book, and these cards that you see are organizing the recipes based on the key chapter layered on the acronym, on each of the letter of the acronym FAIR. So I invite you to peruse and browse at will. We don't have much time. I won't have time to delve into the recipe themselves, but this is the kind of distribution of content. We have most of our content is around findability and interoperability and reusability. We also provide assessment, because this is an important thing. There are a few tools that exist that allow you to check automatically according to a number of patterns, whether you are fair or not, as well as deliver a number of applied examples, real data that we have been verified. You can see before and after event and assessment. And building, also echoing what Barbara mentioned earlier on, even though the verification path is fairly standard, we know we need to understand why you're doing fair in the first place, identify the tools, the metadata schemas. Each of the contexts will be different, and then you will have to somehow tweak your choices and justify somehow and think about it, which ontology you use to begin with and why you've made this choice, because it has consequences in some aspects of interoperability. And possibly this is what is behind the idea of the convergence of the fee profiles, for instance, where we need to identify, to avoid building fair silos, essentially. So here I'm giving you the three flavors, main flavors that we had in the IMI. We had clinical data, observational, clinical trial data, but also more basic science. And so we had to adjust these kind of things. Quickly, this is an example of the recipe that we had. We had a challenge from one of our industrial partners. They had to build a knowledge graph for their own aspects, and they had to build an application ontology for that. And they didn't necessarily have the knowledge in-house. And basically, we developed that recipe to show them how it can be done with open source tool. It's the example using the robot tool, which is developed by the Obo Foundry, and which is really well known and well established. But let's dive into the structure of a recipe itself. You have really the main objectives that are laid out, and it allows you, it's a standardized layout where you have the different ingredients laid out, the key objectives. We have structured and code, obviously, sometimes available, as well as a number of examples and tracking credits of the authors. And what is interesting is we try to eat our own dog food to some extent and deliver fair recipes themselves. So it's a nice way to test the thing. For instance, we have a stable, persistent, resolvable identifier. We rely on W3ID to deliver this. And each of the recipe usually starts with a graphical overview that gives you the content at a glance, which was a very effective tool, interacting with our specialist and to elicit knowledge and to agree on the content before developing further. So moving on, what we also touched upon, I mentioned that at the beginning of the presentation, was the capability maturity model that we try to integrate into that context. Because it's one thing to showcase that a tool works in a particular context, but we need also to understand what has been the progress of the verification step that you've just taken, and whether that action that you've taken is really ready for production, stable enough, everything has been really tested, and it is delivering at scale as well. So this is the kind of thing that we are currently discussing in the FAIR Consortium, how to document that a bit better. So I touched upon this, that our recipes are fair. We have, in terms of findability, we have a JSON LD, which is using schema.org for findability on search engines. We have a stable identifier provided by W3ID. We have identified authors using ORCID IDs. HTTPS protocol, license is identified. It's a Creative Commons for the entire book. And we use the credit ontology for attribution. So you can see, you can have a quick evaluation of the fairness of our recipe already. But it was an interesting exercise to take the Jupyter book framework and see how much we could integrate into these elements. And of course, we are always looking for contribution. And so if you have ideas, if you want to engage with us, I really strongly invite you to get in touch. We rely on GitHub infrastructure, so we can track the issue request, and we can discuss the topic with the editors. And so this is really proving a useful platform. Going quickly, because I don't have much time left, but basically this is the kind of interaction we have. We try to build a community of FAIR experts, so we would love to hear from you. The interactions, as I said, if you know Google Doc, you can have a low entry barrier when it comes to tech side. But if you are confident in Python and Jupyter notebooks and I can do or Markdown, you can just send us a pull request, and that would be great. Okay, yes, just to this is a quick overview. There's a bit of bandwidth lag maybe you're experiencing here, but this is kind of all the FAIR Plus partners that have been interacting with us. As you can see, there is a nice split between the industry and the academics. In terms of academics, we have a strong involvement of the Elixir community, as you can see. And this is a brilliant team that we have assembled. And in terms of content production, we organize monthly meetings, which we call Book Dash. We followed the Alan Turing Institute approach for the Turing Webbook. Very nice interaction with that community as well. So really, it's about building these interactions. And we have section editors. We have an editorial board that gives the direction of where we want to go. And at the moment, since the content is growing, these interactions are, well, the direction we want to go is to expand on the relation between FAIR, knowledge graphs, and AI, for instance, because all these key things are linked. We're doing FAIR to do better data analytics and to find new insights, and this relies on properly annotated and machine accessible data. So yes, this is a same message. We have also interaction with other groups, like in Europe, for instance, the RDM Toolkit and the Pistoia Alliance industry organization that does a lot of work around FAIR for Klein, for instance, with our colleagues there. Thomas Liner, for instance, and we have also interaction with Term for Fair Skills and Fair Sharing, the catalog of data standards that are available from the Data and Readiness group in Oxford, and Peter McKilton and Susanna Sansone were working on that effort. So really, I will finish with this. I will encourage you to use it, join it, and try to make the most. And if you have feedback, get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. And also the book now is also part of the project, the IME2 guidelines recommendations for new projects. And if you want to have a bigger diving into this content, I invite you to check this webinar that we gave back in May. But I would like also to finish here and thanking my collaborators that are part of the editorial book. So Tony at EBI, Wei at University of Luxembourg, Susanna Sansone at Oxford, Andrea Spagliani at Novartis, and Robert Gisman at Bayer. So if you want to reach us, you've got the links here and pointer to the GitHub repo. And I'll take any question. Really, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Philippe. I mean, it was very comprehensive and presentation. So you actually eliminated all my questions already in the presentation when I was writing down. So my first question would have been: Is your FAIR cookbook FAIR? Which obviously is, and the other one would have been the process of contribution, and you already explained quite well. And if people are interested in contributing to it, please then follow this GitHub procedure to make, I think, pull request or something like this, or open issue. Yeah, I'm sure it's explained very well. Maybe one question. I mean, I don't see any question from the audience. Of course, since we are already done with the presentations, we can also smoothly transit to the discussion part of the workshop. And I like to, before we actually continue, I like to also thank Jan overall for his help for the preparation of this. Jan Lefranc for the preparation of this session. He was our contact with all these FAIR initiatives in general. And let's start with his question. He asks, is there a reason, as I think this question was directed to Philippe, is there a reason for using W3ID instead of Perl used in OBO?
Yeah, I think it was the ease of use. It was extremely easy for us to mint the W3ID, and we had full control of that. I think that was really the path of least resistance that we took.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And I actually had one question again to Philippe, since we're already in discussion. I mean, this is so the whole session is about FAIR principles. I mean, it's about FAIR principles, and also give an idea to industrial stakeholders, both in Ontology Commons and outside of Ontology Commons, to how they can really adopt these things. And I think both in the beginning, Barbara's presentation and Philippe's presentation at the end was a good pointers towards that. What are the practical aspects of implementing this? And my question would be for Philippe, do you have any success story in your mind? So you showed a lot of partners at the end of the presentation. Can you mention one maybe example success story that actually was struggling with FAIR principles and then with the magical touch of FAIR cookbook actually managed to handle it?
Yes, and I think this is the one I mentioned, the example with Boehringer Ingelheim, for instance. We had one of these use cases. They were not struggling, but they were faced with that problem. They wanted to unify data and query across different data stores. And they had the need to create an application ontology. And this is where we intervene, essentially. We said, okay, there are tools that exist we are aware of. We had ontology experts as well. And basically that was one aspect. Another aspect is a collaboration with another industry partner. And this was around how to encode data access and access rules using in a data catalog. So the information was coded in DCAT, and then we discussed, okay, how do we annotate how to call it? Yes, the terms of use of a data set. And so there was an ontology which is called Duo that is used for describing access roles for human sensitive data, and is used by the EGA, the European Genotyping Archive. And we showed how to use the same vocabulary, but in a different, in another vocabulary, ODRL. That was another, I think, quite interesting use case that we worked on.
All right. So in terms of working on, so just to I'm trying to understand like how. So I have the FAIR cookbook. So did you consult with these companies, or you just gave them the book and then they basically studied it, or how did that process work?
No. So it worked both ways. I think we had a strong engagement at the very beginning, discussing use cases, and it's been the first year almost of the work, understanding who was the audience and what were really the things that interested people, and it's still ongoing. The discussion is always happening, and we have new projects coming in, new challenges, and so we are interacting. I think the interaction with the Pistoia Alliance, for instance, is another one, but also with the GOFAIR Alliance, which have been doing tremendous work on the FIPS. I think these are the kind of challenge that we all face. I mean, which choices that we need in terms of metadata schemes on ontologies and resources that we use, and how do we make those things compatible? Because there are many ways to combine things, and each community has its own need. How do we retain interoperability in this context?
Yeah, I think this also touches to this context of applying FAIR principles, because there is no one-size-fits-all solution, as you mentioned or Barbara mentioned also. And so then the way to maybe proceed with the ambition of implementing FAIR principles is to first consult the book and then consult you with the communication channels you already provided, basically. When they have more specific issues that they cannot basically find it in the book, in the recipes.
Yes, I think also we have to be humble a bit. There are many companies delivering FAIR services as well, and at industry level. I mean, I don't want to advertise.
I mean, you not as a person, but as a community in a sense.
But yes, I think creating the community would be fantastic, and I think that in terms of sustainability of the resource, it's about training people. So. And training and coalescing, aggregating resources about how people have their experience. I mean, and this is what we try to do. So yeah, it would be nice to get the feedback from the group or contribution.
Barbara wants to say something, I think, about this question.
Yes. So I can only tell that. So I have been collaborating with Eric Scholze on this FIP concept because I really needed it for. I wanted to push something forward because the solutions that I saw 2019 were not so good for community agreements, and so on. So because I'm working for GOFAIR, there's environment research infrastructures, around 14 different infrastructures of different subdomains, so quite ambitious and difficult to converge. And well, we started in 2019 with this FIP approach, so evaluating which resources are used by the communities as they started, although not always fair. And we do this FIP analysis each year to see if something changed. So if the journey really goes towards fair. And I'm now, because this was a nice approach, but it was a more handmade tool at the beginning. Now it becomes more and more automated. And by January, I think we will be finished with the FIP improvement, which really then includes fair enabling resources as sources to choose from, so that these sources are already checked by, for example, Fuji tool and others, so that we will have a third run and then see exactly what has been improved in the meantime. Because what in GOFAIR we also have, so this helped to raise the awareness about the FAIR principles, these workshops. But in addition, we had quite a lot of activities, like within the subdomains, they discussed and analyzed the results and how they could implement better strategies together. And we also support these communities with fair data stewards like me and others to find tools and services and reuse them. And some of the communities had already quite useful services that others could reuse. So there was a lot of exchange and improvement, which we can really demonstrate. And so in addition, we have trainings. So we have lots of trainings on FAIR principles, because this is needed. Although there are just 15 principles, they read not so difficult, but if you go into the details, it becomes really a challenge to do it.
Maybe you can also tell us how to access to this training. So is there an open call? Is there announced somewhere?
Well, we are doing FIP workshops, or we'll start redoing them again, I think next year. So I have to finish the implementation by December, and then, because I think it's better that it's not all handmade by me and composed together, because this FIP convergence matrix helps really to identify how far we are from each other, and it's a good starting point to then see how we can improve, also not just using a fair enabling resource, but also converge to the same or feasible ones.
Very good.
So we announce this in our GOFAIR website when we are ready with that.
All right, great. So I think it will be very interesting also for our demonstrators. So you might get some participants from there. Particularly, actually, this FIP tool is also very interesting for us, because one of our tasks in the project is to evaluate the fairness of the demonstrators, in a sense, and how they improved. And this is exactly what we kind of need, in a sense. And looking forward to the finished version. And my question then, I will come back to I will come back to Emma's question in a minute.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Sorry. And Jan says, so he already discussed with Eric Schultes to organize a workshop for Ontology Commons in the context of the KXS activities we have. So it should be happening sometime next year. So good news. And is then FIP tool in the FAIR cookbook? You're muted, I think, Philippe.
Yes. So you ask whether we had a FIP tool in the FAIR cookbook? Not yet, but I think that's a great idea. I think I will talk to Eric and Barbara to get recipes from them into the book.
Yeah. So maybe it's a good exercise for the KAEXS workshop, as such a hard name to pronounce it, to make this introduction of the FIP tool, so also to demonstrate how this contribution process works. we can make a small tutorial about.
Happy to help out. But I want to say also to Philippe that I think all these resources, this cookbook, are great, really are needed, because we need to put this all together and make this available, I think.
Yeah. So Emna asks again, so we said FAIR cookbook implements the FAIR principles, and Emna asks to what extent, if I understand it correctly. So does the FAIR cookbook implement all the FAIR sub-principles, and how much of it is actually FAIR? And to me, I also want to add something. So is there like a data set that we can query, for example, recipes in a mechanized way, if you want to search them?
No, not yet. So in a way, there are two reasons for that. The first one is that for creating the book, we use the framework. So we are somehow limited to, in order to retain compatibility, what we wanted to keep things lightweight. But we also wanted to test, as I said, that our recipe would be somehow fair. So we deliver this kind of minimal capability, but showcasing what it means and practically. Obviously, if people want to have more advanced solutions, they can look into, there are many ways. But when it comes to data sets, we can point, the idea would be we would point to tools like Yummy Data that list a number of Sparkle endpoints that can be queried, for instance, in the field of biology of relevance, and then see what is the fitness against use cases.
Actually, this is great, because I can give this as an exercise to my students to make a data set of FAIR recipes in my semantic metaphor knowledge graph course. Good. But you said then the fairness of the recipes are first targeting the minimal necessity
for instance,
of being fair in a sense to some extent.
Because for instance, if you look at one of the FAIR principle, which is like, we need sufficient metadata, or sufficiently rich metadata. Or
so what sufficient means, right? The question.
Exactly. And then, or it's a community accepted. So does it mean that you just create your own community and that's it? You say or you need to identify something that already exists and comply with that. I think these are the kind of questions that we have to discuss, but we cannot deliver completely a data set or constraint on this at this stage.
Yeah, I think this is also a good transition point to the demonstrators we heard from, because so their guidelines are relatively clear in the FAIR principles, but of course there is also a lot of subjective things. So we had also a lot of discussion in our previous workshops. I think Jan also had a good effort on this. What is the minimum viable fairness, in a sense? So fair enough, I think we called it as a jokingly, in a sense. So because I guess the point is that it's better to start small and build on top of it incrementally, because it could be challenging to convince to policymakers, etc. So to become fair enough is already good enough, I would say.
Can I answer here?
Yeah, sure.
So as I said, to make your metadata and data fair is quite challenging. So let's start with making the metadata fair. And making the metadata fair means, first of all, agreeing on hopefully globally used standards for your metadata, but for your community-specific content, you have to build your community template together with your community. Otherwise, they will not reuse it. And you have also to make sure that you use vocabularies to populate your metadata templates. So that's the first step, so that, because only using vocabularies which are fair themselves, you can provide fair metadata. I think that's the entry point. But it's not solving everything. But if we can achieve that, we would already be very happy. And then there are other steps to be done afterwards, but let's achieve this.
Yeah, thank you for the comments. And I want to ask Anna and Sebastian if they're still there. Yes. So you implemented already quite a bit of the FAIR principles in your use cases. So two things. What were the challenges in the beginning for you to do this? And second, what helped you the most to implement it? Did you use any tools, any guidelines, any book? Or hire the guy who knows the stuff? Or I mean, what is the trick?
Actually, there was no trick. It was a gradually implementation of the principles within, so making the data findable, having identifiers. So this is kind of something intrinsic in software development. If you want to have software that is not only for just one little thing, that is reusable with time. So it was really there was no need up to now to use any cookbook to reach the level up to now. Of course, it helps to be aware of the principles and to be aware of what can be improved and what are all the things that we can do to tweak this fairness level a little bit more. But so up to the point where OAS is now, it wasn't really a big challenge. I think the challenge is going to be now to really boost the fairness levels.
So you say you had two more dimensions that is not particularly implemented in the OAS use case. And what is then the use case for this? So you mentioned some interoperability between different organizations. So what kind of interoperability?
So when coming to a new customer and trying to find the requirements to build up the new site, the new yard. So the customer already has some documents, some data that they have, and if we can make the side of data from OAS interoperable, so if we can make them in ontology like that, we can then make a connection to the data that is used in the customer. This is going to be an increase in decrease in time that you need to get everything going. So this is why it would be important to have the data at on the OAS side, to have it more reusable and being able to connect with, if you do it with ontologies, with community standards, to be able to connect with the clients on the other side.
Okay, good. And this is planned basically in the next period.
Exactly. This is what we are analyzing at the moment, and we want to implement in the next few months.
All right. So did you have any issues from the policymakers' point of view, so organization point of view, to convince? But you already said that people, in your use case, people already saw the benefit of it in a sense. But sometimes it's may be challenging to explain the benefits to C-level people. So not technical people. Was there any situation like this?
I think it's everywhere, and here, of course, you have a lot of domain knowledge and knowledge that is on the heads of people, and so one part of this ontology building is also building up rules to and the relations between the entities and the concepts, and this knowledge has to we have to convince the domain experts to provide their knowledge and in the form of rules and entities and so on. And so this is also a challenge, and to make them see that this is actually a good thing, that this will save them time in the next time that they have to set up a new site.
Yeah. I mean, it's important to have metadata that is machine readable towards fairness, but to explain people that this is necessary is also another challenge. And I think this was also one of the challenges Philippe was mentioning in the one of the audiences of the cookbook, for example, was this policymakers, maybe towards also to that also to convince people. And there's one question from Ellen Mazimwe. I'm not sure if I understand it properly, so if I'm rephrasing it wrongly, please take the stage and explain yourself, Ellen. So he says, given that interoperability is recursively defined within FAIR, have you identified any trade-offs within the FAIR principles that result from this definition for the use cases? I think this question is addressed to all speakers that dealt with use cases. But yeah, if anyone cares to answer or have any answer to offer.
Well, I think also Jan Lefranc can answer this because he has studied this in detail. But I think this recursive FAIR applies for the interoperability. So first of all, yeah, because we have to reuse in FAIR vocabulary. So we need vocabulary, but they should also be fair. And I think we have now a set of specifications what fair vocabulary means. So I think that makes sense. So I don't see any problem or trade-off regarding this recursive FAIR term in the principles. For me, it makes sense, yeah. But probably I have not found the problem yet. Yeah.
Jan, did you find a problem, or anyone else or is just the natural ways that things supposed to be, in a sense?
Maybe there is one aspect on the question about the interoperability as well, and I think this is the effect of mentioned that where are those community agreed standard defined, and I think this is where fair sharing plays an important part, because this is a resource where you can find profiles which may be recorded there. So, and then we can see the uptake of such a profile and the diffusion of it, and whether it's successful or not. And that's also a kind of weak point of the interoperability aspect. If the fragmentation becomes too high, then again we will be having problem hitting those endpoints which serve data that use very, very different metadata profiles.
Yeah, and here I also want to say that in principle, if you follow each of the 15 principles, yeah, then you should get to a fair data set. But that's not really true, because as Philippe said, if you have different approaches, it does not mean that they are interoperable, because they don't. They know what they are, but they're still not reusable together. So therefore, convergence is also needed, which is not really part of the FAIR principles, but we came up with this necessity.
All right. I hope this answers Ellen's question. If there are any other questions, please feel free to ask it in the chat to our speakers.
So I would like to add something about what is needed for the verification. So we talk about fair readability. Yeah, that's the first step. But then it should also be fair interpretable. So machine interpretable, and if possible also actionable. So this distinction is important to know. So we probably if we reach the fair readability just with metadata, but this metadata should also include specific elements that inform the machines what they can do with it, so the operations. So
you mean what they can do with the data, or what they can do with the principles, in a sense? Data.
No,
okay.
with the data, sorry.
With the data, yeah. So
that's still not totally clear how to do, but there are approaches, but it's not really.
I guess this goes towards more like modeling actions semantically and machine readable way, or through, for example, API annotations.
And this goes into the discussions around fair digital objects. architecture, how you can implement this.
Yeah, so Jan is also making a comment regarding this, that data interoperability is always a challenge. It's relatively easier to cope with the metadata interoperability, but data, I think he means this requires to use semantic artifacts, as mentioned by Barbara. I think this refers to the data interoperability here. So yeah, I guess metadata is more like a low-hanging fruit, so to say. And then starts the real challenge with this data interoperability. Yeah, and Jans also points out that recursivity should be tackled use case by use case, which I also agree, I would say. We still have another 13-14 minutes. And I'd like to also ask, so we have the cookbook now. I mean, I am very happy that we have these two things today mentioned here, especially particularly the cookbook and the FIP tool, because for me, when as a person who's supposed to also evaluate fairness in different cases, and also as a person who is maybe supposed to also help people to implement fairness, because I also have an academician side and I teach semantic technologies in the school, etc. And we also cover the fairness, of course, even though it's briefly. And this was always for me the missing part, that how to mechanize things and what is the like go-to source to actually have good examples and demonstrates how the principles can be implemented and what are the benefits, etc. Also, so from more hands-on point of view, we also had this discussion in the Open Science Fair workshop we had. So I guess when we talk about tools to really implement the FAIR principles, and it goes, of course, comes from FAIR metadata and data, there is a plethora of work. Basically, we can just use, for example, ontology editors, repositories that provide some sort of mechanism, this artifacts, this what Barbara mentioned in her presentation, is a part of the out-of-the-box experience, right? So what I've seen so far is the guidelines we have seen here is towards the people who actually have the data and metadata, but are there any guidelines for tool implementers? So if I want to, for example, implement a data store like Data Hub, right? Or how is it the other one? I forgot the name. Where I can publish my RDF data. Or OFKN, I think that's it's called. So if I want to really, if I'm a tool developer wants to provide for example, repository, and I want to provide the out-of-the-box FAIR experience, is there any guidelines towards these people, the implementers? My question to maybe our speakers also. Or they can just reuse the guidelines that is targeting the users, end users in a sense.
That's a tough question. I think because you always have to adjust a little bit, but it's always nice to have examples and to follow along to some extent. So this is where there is always an interaction between the data type that you are considering, the verification goal. I think this is a discussion that we had as well quite extensively in the FAIR Plus consortium. Before starting, really clarify what is the thing that you want to achieve that is most important for you before embarking into that trip, into that journey. So that's obtaining clarity about what is at stake and what you want to achieve, and also have a metric about that would allow you to test your process would be quite important. And talking of the metrics, I think that you mentioned also the FAIR evaluation, I guess the evaluation of the fairness levels. And then this is where, at the moment, a lot of things are done manually and doesn't scale up with a mass of data that we have. So we will need to refine those aspects, and a lot of work is being done at the moment along those axes, I guess.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end, this initiative, so not only targeting, in a sense, so my question also that, and also towards more the tool implementers, the people who develop tools like repositories, for example, because this would already, I think, help quite a bit if these tools, for example, data repository like DataHub, already provided, I mean, they already did do this, but just as an example, already provided some of the FAIR principles implemented out of the box as soon as I publish my data there. So this is, I don't know if any, like, if as a tool implementer, I come to you and ask these questions, I guess the same cookbook can be beneficial for those people to this cookbook we have for the end users who are implementing FAIR principles in a sense.
Well, we would hope that's the case. And if it's not, we also want to know what is missing. I think that's an important feedback to obtain, what people are used. Of course, because of our context, the context we operate in, there will be a bias towards a certain type of data, but the main principles will remain true. I mean, if you talk about, what kind of technology exists to connect data, to build knowledge graphs, and to access them, to make these connections, that will be there. In terms of evaluation, I think what possibly, and this is the work done by Mark Wilkinson at the very beginning, we're trying to make every single of the FAIR principle testable. And this is proving quite hard because some of the principles may be a bit loose at times, and we run into that problem. This is also a question that we got today.
Yeah. And this is the next big behemoth to target that actually mechanize this process to scale in a sense. Because I think this is also good potential because it involves a lot of it machine interpretability, machine readability in a sense, and this is maybe the requirement for mechanization. And now to come to the point that how do we mechanize? How do we make machine readable the stuff we create, the principles, etc., which we are already going towards this direction with Barbara's tool also by, for example, making FAIR principles machine readable in a sense by annotating them, and it's already a good step towards that.
What was interesting as well was the notion, the initial problem that was faced, like FAIR evaluation that was not good was considered like a bad thing. But I think the FAIRification is a constant process that has to be revisited all the time, and you can be good on one axis but not so, because maybe it's not really relevant, so you need to revisit, and so the FAIR evaluations evaluation are tools to improve your processes. It should not be a metric in itself for judging things. It's just to help assistance to improve the way you deal with digital objects and make sure that you can identify possibly weak points or things that could be improved on. And that, I think, is a very important point that the tool by Mark and the FAIR evaluator Mark Wilkinson has developed was actually kicking off this work.
Yes, great for the great discussion. It was really nice to have you all here. And I think I will use the last 5 minutes to present you what is next, really briefly. But before I do that, I'd like to thank again all of the speakers and organizers for the workshop. It was a pleasure to moderate, and I hope it was beneficial to the audience today, and definitely will be beneficial for us later. Now I'd like to again share my screen. Briefly. Yeah. Okay, so what is next now? We have the demonstrator session in the room 1 and industrial engineering session in the room 2. But I am the room 1 guy, so I explain what's coming now. We will present with the moderation of Anna Fenzel from our co-lead of the demonstrator web package in the Ontology Commons project. We have 3 presentations, 2 from existing demonstrators. So we try to focus on, we are on the first year of the project already done, and we kind of maintain the baseline, so establish the baseline, so set the initial requirements, etc. And now the question is, how do we actually measure the impact of these, of the results of the Ontology Commons, or how it is planned to be measured in a sense, and the current status of the demonstrations. And now, as also Gerhard in the morning mentioned, we are in the process of acquiring new demonstrators. And one of the candidates we have, Jasper Kochos from the Wageningen University, will present his work and regarding demonstrating the FAIR data station for managing metadata in the life sciences. And similar to this session, there will be a discussion for 45 minutes. Thank you very much. I think Christian will share the notes with me briefly, shortly, and then maybe I hope to see you again in the summary session end of the day to recap what we had today in the session and the main points we discussed. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.